Welcome to another episode of O2N Life Styled. I'm Nicole Dyer, Griffith. On this episode, we would be introducing you to two significant human beings who have made an indelible mark not only on the national and regional landscape, but so too internationally.
These trailblazers hit the global stage, very proud of their Caribbean roots, and we are going to share with you how that has impacted on their journeys to excellence.
Renee Cummings. We had a chat with Renee at the Hyatt Regency Trinidad. Renee has been one of those individuals who has left no stone unturned to unearth excellence and exceptionalism in everything that she does. From journalist to criminologist to now data scientist and AI ethicist, Renee is one of those human beings who definitely leaves a mark. Let's hear more from Renee Cummings.
I think sometimes we really don't understand the power that we hold. And we often believe if it's imported, it's going to be better. And we don't understand that what we export is what excites the world. And the other thing that we have got to pay attention to is our own identity. And I think sometimes we find ourselves spiraling in this identity crisis. Trinidad and Tobago, to me, again, the most diverse, the most inclusive. And if we were to get diversity and inclusivity really, really fine-tuned, we could be one of the most equitable spaces in the world. When it comes to creativity, I think there is no place like Trinidad and Tobago. When it comes to excellence and the amount of excellence in a small space, we have outpaced and outmatched the best in the world. But we have got to believe in ourselves and believe that we have within these borders everything that we need to really make Trinidad and Tobago the kind of country that we can become. And yes, sometimes we need the outside world to say this is something great. But we know the thing is great, but I think sometimes we're afraid of ourselves and we cannot be frightened by ourselves anymore. Well, I think it has always been just being me and just understanding that if there's something that I want, I'm going to go for it. And oftentimes not succumbing to the negativity, because sometimes you can. And sometimes you often feel as though you're giving, particularly in this space, you feel that you're giving so much of yourself, but you're feeling as though you're not receiving. And sometimes you just have to continue to smile. You know, one of the things that I do, I continue to smile. No doesn't make me sad. No makes me better. No excites me more. No makes me go back and say, what could I do differently? Or what have I not done? Or what other resources do I need to tap into? And I think what Trinidad and Tobago does sometimes, it makes us so good. So good that when we get out there, people are like, where did you come from? That's something that people ask me, where did you come from? That's the question that they continue to ask. And when you say, I'm from Trinidad and Tobago, and they are always like, and why did they let you leave? Exactly. That's what they usually say, why? But I think, we have to get better at loving ourselves. I think Trinidad and Tobago is in a place where, as a collective and as a country, we've experienced a lot of trauma. And I think we've got to find more healing spaces, and we've got to have more open and honest conversation with each other. And we've got to go back to those things that we did so well, and to the kinds of mentors as a collective that we have had as a country. Trinidad and Tobagonians have been everywhere. When we think about Pan-Africanism, when we think about civil rights in the United States, When we think about just so many different movements across the world, we have had Trinidadians, George Padmore, the father of Pan-Africanism, Stokely Carmichael, Kwame Ture. I mean, the leading voice when it comes to Black power, when it comes to American civil rights, and when it comes to organizing for politics and advocacy. I mean, when we just think about so many ways in which Trinidad and Tobago nationals have just excelled, I think we've got to start believing in ourselves, and we've got to start loving each other a little more. We've got to start smiling at each other a little more. We've got to say, I see you, and I appreciate you, and I need you. And I think if we start to do more of that, we will really see the potential we have as a country. So a project that I'm working on now is about justice, and it's really about combining artificial intelligence and virtual reality with criminal justice solutions. So instead of us putting people behind bars and hoping that, something miraculous would happen to change their trajectory, is using technology to help bring them to a place of rehabilitation or resocialization, or when we bring people back as they return back into society, they come with an extraordinary amount of skills. So it really is ways in which we can use technology to drive creative solutions, and not only in criminal justice, but just in the ways in which we're interacting. So I'm spending a lot of time now in artificial intelligence, but more in the line of product development and the ways in which we could really reform in a very radical way some of our very old and sort of archaic ideas about justice. Because justice is not something that is static. Justice is something that is very dynamic. And we've got to bring that feel to criminal justice. So although someone is incarcerated, although someone is involved with the criminal justice system, life does not stop. We have to continuously prepare people for the challenges. And the best way for us to do that now is technology and virtual reality.
Following up on that, Richard, what are your thoughts?
I think she just continues to push the envelope and break the glass ceiling. So much more to this multidimensional human. When we come back, you'll see some more of Renee Cummings.
Let's hear more from this absolutely phenomenal personality, Renee Cummings.
I think for me, it is that I have been myself for so long that I don't, think about being anything else. And I think when I meet people and I engage with people, one of the things that people always speak to is my passion for what I do, the honesty in which I do it, and empathy. And empathy is something that continues to drive me. I believe I was born for service. And whatever I do, it's about giving service. Now, being a Black woman in very white spaces, it's something, that's the only thing that I can be. And I think it really helps sometimes people understand really what diversity is. Because you often see a very Afrocentric look. But then there's someone who was raised in a very East Indian sort of lifestyle, and someone who understands so many different cultures, and someone who has lived in so many different spaces. So I grew up for a good space of time in living in Mexico, and even being in that environment in Mexico as a child, being the only, again, Afro-Caribbean child in a Mexican primary school, and a teacher calling me a black doll, and it's something that I grew up hearing. I was always a black dolly, so my fellow students call me, they call me Muneca Morena. So it was just something, that I've been accustomed to. But it's also really about identity and representation, which is so critical for me, and just understanding that when I walk into a space, I'm not walking by myself. There are people who have walked before me, those ancestors who have walked before me, and people who are going to walk after me. And I must always create that space and shine that light for those who are coming behind me to ensure that they continue to see what the future is looking like. I look at my life now, and much of my life is like my father, his passion for country, his passion for developing something that was so dynamic and so powerful at that time, his love for Trinidad and Tobago, and the kind of sacrifices he made with his own life to leave his professional career and then to come back to Trinidad and Tobago and invest so much in our culture. His humility is something that I may have acquired, because no matter where I go, people speak about the ways in which he has inspired them. People speak about the things that he did for them, and how motivated and they were inspired, and how committed and patriotic they feel, and even his own desire to be excellent, and the ways in which my father represented this country and how seriously he took representing Trinidad and Tobago. It's not something that he took lightly, being a national player or just having this national presence. And then looking at his own scrapbook and looking at him from Richmond Street boy straight on to the New York Cosmos, and seeing that at every stage, he really acquired an extraordinary amount of success, and just his commitment to even developing young men, because when he took over the national team and turned it into the strike squad, there were so many players there who really did not know what it meant to be a national player. And it was like a school that he had, how he designed his own T-shirts and their suits, and when they traveled. So, and then my mother was committed to public service. She left Bishop Anstey High School and she went straight into the public service here, and she built her own career there. And it's something that I've always seen, her desire to be excellent at the things that she was doing, and also her love for people. And her coming from also both my parents are coming from humble beginnings, and really just having a love for Trinidad and Tobago. And even my mom and dad at a time when they could have acquired US citizenship, deciding that they wanted their contribution to be here. And I think it is that also made me come back home, because you want to come back when you learn things. You want to share it with the people you love. When you go out there and you get information, you want to bring it home and say, this is how we can do things. This is the way that we can change things. Oftentimes, we don't always get the reception that we look for. And many times you believe that maybe my country doesn't love me as much as, I love my country. But you know what? It's something that we've got to continue to do. I'll never get tired of loving Trinidad and Tobago. Never. And never get tired of coming back home and doing whatever. Anyone calls me from Trinidad, if it's a student that sends me a message on Facebook, or somebody who reaches out to me on Instagram, or professionals who want me to do something, I'm always doing it. I'm always doing it. Wherever I go, I don't even have to mention Trinidad and Tobago, because I am Trinidad and Tobago. So, yeah.
Next up, Andrew M. Ramroop, holder of the Order of the British Empire and Shakonia Medal, Gold.
Andrew Ramroop, a true trailblazer, a master artist, bespoke tailor, making a mark in Savile Row, where no other Caribbean creative has gone before. He was also awarded Black Businessman of the Year in London. Remarkable strides for a Caribbean native. He believes in his Caribbean essence, and that's what I find so empowering about him. So he carries with him the ethos of coming from this part of the world and transforming the mindset of people the world over on what artistry is about. Artistry coming from this part of the world. Let's take a look at Andrew Ramroop.
I'll give you a little background of how I actually ended up doing what I do. Initially, coming from very, very humble backgrounds, we didn't have very much. I wanted to make clothes for myself. So I cut up my mother's pillowcase at around about age 9, she reminded me. And I sewed a side seam, the inside leg, what it looked roughly like a pair of pajamas. And that was my first attempt of making something. I always liked making something, making and building things. And so at the back of our house, for instance, I took 4 twigs, I buried it into the ground, put a roof on it, and made myself a little bed out of a rice bag. And that was what I built, my house. And it was so well built because the 4 twigs began to grow and send out shoots. So making things, building was a part of me. So building sartorial art is what I do. It's that I first heard of Savile Row as the pinnacle of sartorial excellence, where the captains of industry, prime ministers, presidents, Hollywood stars, the rich and famous, that's where they went to have their suits made. And like a young athlete wanting to be in the Olympics, I wanted to be in the Olympics of tailoring. And so I left school at a very young age, under 14, 13 going on 14. I served an apprenticeship learning to make trousers. I then wanted to learn to make jackets. I learned to make jackets by a tailor who had been to England in 1966 and went to the Tailor and Cutter Academy and came back to Trinidad, opened his business on Frederick Street, and excited my young mind, knowing very well that I would never get there. He excited my young mind about Savile Row. But what he was actually doing is actually influencing me without knowing that this is where you ought to be. And lots of his customers actually encouraged me to go to Canada or to the United States, because at that time it was $2 to 1. And they said, you'll be doing the same work and you'll be getting double the pay. But I had heard of Savile Row, where the origin of tailoring began. And that's where I aspired to be. And so I saved as much as I possibly can from age 14 to age 17 and a half. I bought a boat ticket, and I very often say I sailed to Savile Row. I didn't sail to England or to Europe. I sailed to Savile Row. And I got a job at Sean Connery's tailor, James Bond. And that was my first foot into the street of 1,000 needles. I continued in my journey to improve myself. I did an evening class doing O levels, because having left school at 13 going on 14, I wasn't that well educated, primary education. So I did O levels in English language, English literature, French and mathematics. And during the day, I went to the London College of Fashion. I signed up for a 3-year degree in bespoke tailoring. And so I completed that 3-year after the first year. It was a selection process. 15 students starts in the first year, 10 get selected to the second year, and 8 get selected for the final year. So you have 8 really experienced tailors coming out after 3 years. After the first year, the principal invited me to the office and suggested to me that if I could complete a 3-year degree in 2 years, he will skip me the second year and put me straight onto the final year. That was music to my ear, because I was saving now £900 a year school fees, and it gets me back into Savile Row 1 year earlier. And so that's exactly what I did. I went back to Savile Row looking for a job. Maurice Sedwell employed me on the 22nd of July 1974, 50 years this year. So this is a very important anniversary for me this year. And I worked my way within the company. I began to buy shares in the company in 1982, and by 1988 I had owned 45% of the company, and I bought another 45% in August 1988, and by that time I owned 90% of the company. And a couple of years later I bought the other 10%, and so for all intents and purposes I began to own my own establishment on Savile Row around about 1988, which was a huge milestone for me. 1974 was a huge milestone for me, because I began to think, that is when I began to think, how can I distinguish myself on Savile Row as a business owner, as opposed to being a tailor working in a company. And that's when I designed our signature curve, and I designed our signature delta line and our signature sport. More than 99% of the suits I make or the garments that I make are actually our own design. So what I've done, I've taken the suit, the traditional suit, and personalized the design to the extent that it will be distinguished as an Andrew Ramroop design. I began to put a little bit of color, making the flower hole and the lapel, coordinating with other accessories with the tie one might wear, with the lining and so on, begin to put in a little color. And at that time, you can only get 4 different colors of the same paisley design for linings. And I bought all 4. I bought the stock of all 4. So I could be the only one that's using it. And then as fancy linings began to be more in vogue, because there was such demand, then it's now the norm. But I actually like to claim to be the first tailor that used fancy linings and colorful linings in suits. It was really exciting when I was invited by the BBC, BBC Radio 4, to tell my life story in music and conversation. And there is a program called Desert Island Discs on Radio 4, BBC Radio 4, that I was on, telling my life story. As a result of that, I had an approach from Professor Henry Louis Gates at Harvard University to write my autobiography. Well, after he heard the broadcast, I had 3 offers, one from Hollywood and 2 from the United Kingdom, to write a screenplay. And 2 of the 3 persons wrote to me and asked if I was ever interested in writing a screenplay on my life, to get in touch with them. But a 3rd person did very much what I like to do and what I admired and observed in a human being who is really keen on doing something. He actually turned up on Savile Row, knocked on my door and asked to see me. And he said, I heard the Desert Island Discs program, I heard of your life story, and I want to write a screenplay. And I thought, this is a man who's actually come in and showed initiative other than what the others have done. And I said yes. And so he wrote the screenplay. He offered it to film companies. It's been accepted by Buff Films. In Paris, 2 Fridays ago, a very well-known Hollywood star, I would say, signed an agreement to play a master tailor on the life of Andrew Ramroop, the Savile Row tailor who came from Trinidad and Tobago. We have a wealth of opportunities with the influence of Carnival and the color and the costumes. We have a wealth of influence in our music, in the steel pan, in the reggae, in calypso, in soca. We have so much going for us in our beaches, in our rivers, in our mountains. There is such a wealth of things around us that's freely available to be inspired, to be encouraged, and to be motivated. So if one wants to actually get into the space of fashion, just look around you. Don't look at what they're doing in Europe, or what they're doing in North America, or what they're doing in Latin America. It's right here on your doorstep. Just go out there and find it.
Talk about intellectual stimulation. Richard?
I find what is really amazing about both of them, Nicole, is the fact that they are humble beings. They speak their truth, they speak their pursuit of excellence with a humility, both coming from spaces that they are very proud of.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I agree with that, Richard, particularly the conversation we had with Renee. You know, I actually refer to Renee whenever I speak of Renee Cummings as the fabulous Renee Cummings, because in every different space that you have seen Renee present herself, she takes absolute care, always in black. I mean, that is one thing that we've recognized with her. That's her favorite color. But that being the case, it also underscores her stoicism in the way in which she frames everything she does with excellence. And that is underscored in every single footstep that she makes. And you know, the beautiful thing about Renee is you see that transcending to her daughter, Asia. So that it's a wonderful combination of all the things that makes a well-rounded individual. And it really pins it down to that sense of humility that you mentioned, and all of the exceptionalism. It is underscored by humility.
Yes, and Andrew prides himself. I think what drew Andrew and I together, because you know I'm this big advocate for the Caribbean aesthetic.
Yeah.
And Andrew is definitely a benchmark for that. He says in everything that he does, he has to always have some reference to where he has come from. He speaks proudly of his humble beginnings in Tunapuna. He talks about the land and the beauty of the flora and the fauna and how it inspires him and moves him to create bespoke work, but with an edge of where he has come from. And he's very proud to be Trinbagonian.
So I'll share a little secret with you when it comes to Andrew Ramroop. I recall some years ago when Andrew was awarded with the Order of the British Empire. I read his story and I was so taken aback. I said, this gentleman came from Trinidad and Tobago. There was such a sense of pride.
That's the corollary of what O2N Life Styled is about. And we found two exemplary human beings who do their work with such pride, with such excellence, and with such passion. And they also always carry, as you would have heard, their Caribbean essence.
Absolutely. The Caribbean aesthetic, as you like to say, my friend. So, ladies and gentlemen, this has been another wonderful episode of O2N Life Styled. And you, I'm sure, would have been able to identify those common threads that bind in each one of our special guests on this episode. So, this is Nicole Dyer Griffith, and this has been O2N Life Styled.
I'm Richard Young. See you next time.